She's the subject of songs, poems, movies. There is this very sexy French movie called Mozart's Sister. And if you want to get turned on with some 18th century candlelit boffin, good news.
History, I'd like to follow me down the rabbit hole. History, I'd like to, frankly, I want to know.
Hello, and welcome to HILF, History I'd Like to Fuck, where history is a party and everybody's coming. I am your host, Dawn Brody. And Wolfgang Amadaeus Mozart is the Beatles of classical music. Okay, I mean, even if you think you don't know his songs or you have the audacity to say you don't like the genre, it doesn't matter. It's in your brain. He's in your ears, all right? You got the ba 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 ba. Okay, you know it, right? He is super famous. Now, Nannerl Mozart was his sister, and she's not famous at all. She was, however, as talented. Some said she was even more talented than he was. She was also a child prodigy, and she also had amazing hair. So why was she, unlike her brother, ignored in her time and totally overlooked by history? Yep, it's because she was Sagittarius. Just kidding. It was because she was a woman. Duh. But Nannerl wasn't entirely forgotten, obviously. And she was carefully selected by my guest, LAZOU, herself a composer and musician. LAZOU's music is all over film and television. It crosses genres. And get this, she's trilingual. She writes songs in English, French, and Mauritian Creole. And also, just so you know, other than my theme song, all of the music that you hear throughout this episode are Mozart's compositions. Some of them are played on modern instruments and with a twist, but they're all his, if you're wondering. Let's get started. I introduced you first, LAZOU, as a musician and composer, but I'm ignoring the fact that the reason we're together is because you're also a dope podcaster.
Oh, thank you.
Of course. And I'm a fan. I'm a fan of your music. As usual, I helped my guest. So I listened to a bunch of your music and I listened to your podcast. And it's called Nuances, Stories of Our Asian Experience. And I mean, tell me about that. Tell me about the podcast and how that got started.
Yeah, so the podcast initially, the goal was to humanize Asian stories at a time when anti-Asian sentiment was very high. Started out during the pandemic. But as soon as I started recording guests, it became clear to me that this was more for the community than about the community. Because a lot of people, when I was interviewing them, they would say things like, nobody's ever asked me those questions. Because I would be asking them, what has it been like for you to grow up in the United States as an Asian person? I didn't grow up here. So my experience is very different from most Asian Americans who, grew up here. And then my co-host at the time, she grew up on the border of Texas, which is a very different experience from being in California, for example, right?
Yeah.
So initially it was to showcase the diverse experiences of the Asian diaspora. But as the podcast evolved, it became more a space to process our experiences and also to reflect on what our communities are doing that are problematic that we have the power to address. So there is a lot of anti-Blackness in the Asian community, for example. There's Islamophobia in some parts of the community. There's all kinds of things that is within our community that we can help address. So it's both a space for us to say, hey, people are not treating us great, but also maybe we're doing problematic things too, like how can we address that?
Yeah.
And then through interviewing people, and I try to go out and seek people from diverse experiences, different subgroups. Asian is a very big umbrella term. There's so many countries in Asia. So I try to get guests who are in different career paths, different ethnic groups, different marginalized identities. And about a quarter of my guests were from the queer community. And I found that a lot of them, they both felt isolated in the queer spaces that were very white-centric and had a lot of anti-Asian sentiment that is pretty overt. And then they're also not feeling fully accepted in their Asian community because there's a lot of homophobia and transphobia in those circles. For example, something that I learned that shocked me was that on gay profiles on dating apps, no fats, no femmes, no Asians is a thing. And I'm like, what?
Whoa. What? That's crazy. Well, and you cast such a wide lens. It's so cool that you managed to stay inclusive at the same time, because from what I kind of gathered from being both outside of the community and having not met you before as I was getting immersed in what you're doing, you yourself have such a unique background because you're ethnically Chinese, but you were born and raised on this island called Mauritius. Am I saying it right?
Mauritius.
Can you tell us what you think about that experience of growing up on the island? Tell us about the island of Mauritius, because wow.
Yes.
But also how you think, if at all, your experience as unique within the community has maybe given you a perspective that is allowing you to kind of cast this wide net and invite everybody in.
Yeah. So Mauritius is a tiny African island east of Madagascar. It's the only place the dodo bird ever lived. And if you've ever seen the underwater waterfall on the internet, that's where that is.
Amazing.
It's the size of Oahu. There's 1.2 million people on the island, so it's very small. And East Asian people like me, Chinese people, are 2% of the population. So I was a minority there. Mm-hmm. The majority of the people on the island are of South Asian or African descent. So I grew up in a place where, as a light-skinned person, I was the minority. Mm-hmm. So very big shift from that to here.
But then you had a gap, because didn't you go, if I'm not mistaken, from this amazing island off the coast between Africa and Madagascar to Canada?
Yeah. So actually,
that seems like a huge leap to me.
I actually was born in Canada, and then my parents moved back because they didn't like the cold. My mom got really sick and couldn't work. They couldn't afford to stay also. And at the time, there was no internet. So, my mom was really homesick. So they moved back. I grew up in Mauritius and went back to Canada because I had Canadian citizenship. So I could pay local tuition fees, which is so cheap compared to what you would pay in the U.S. Even the international fees in Canada are way cheaper than the U.S. So,
crazy.
Yeah.
Tragic.
So I moved to Canada, and it wasn't as big of a culture shock because there is actually a big community of Mauritians in Toronto.
That's crazy to me. That sounds like the best night out. Like, I just want to go out with you guys and pick your brains. Be like, tell me everything. I want to know about the underwater waterfall. I want to know what you guys think about the dodo. Who killed the last dodo? I want to know the whole thing.
Yeah, and Toronto was a very diverse place. I went to the University of Toronto, which is a huge campus, 90,000 students. So people are from all over the place. So it didn't feel odd to be from such a remote place because people were from all over the world. After I graduated, I worked at a startup that got acquired in Silicon Valley. So then I moved to Silicon Valley, and that's when the culture shock started, I think. Before I even moved to the US, I had to fill out some forms to, immigration and all that stuff. And on those immigration forms, you are made to feel like you're not welcome, let's just say, because you find out that you're going to be termed a non-resident alien in the United States of America. It's like, okay, I feel welcome.
You're like, who doesn't love aliens? Like,
yeah. I mean, I know like Area 51 is like cool, but yeah. Whereas in Canada, when you're moving there, you're called a new Canadian, or something very, very polite, very Canadian.
Yeah. Well, and it's wild to me that you went from like being a minority on the tiny island to a minority within Toronto, but that the first time that you really like felt the yuckiness of it is when you came to the United States. That breaks my heart.
Yeah, I mean, the form was definitely like, okay, this is a very different tone. But then moving to Silicon Valley is still relatively, very, very diverse. So I didn't really feel it that much until the 2016 election. And then I was like, wait, what did I sign up for?
Right. Well, and you said that 2020 during the pandemic was when it was like this Asian hate was so prevalent everywhere. And it sounds like that was the impetus then for the podcast.
Yeah.
Right. Did you find in your conversations with the community early on that there was unity in that feeling that like maybe we've always felt marginalized? There's been an element to being a minority in the United States, but like this shit's fucking different. Like something's changed. Was that the general feeling across the board?
I don't know if it felt like something changed more than like, I think it definitely felt like it got worse during that time for people, but it seemed to me that for the first time, it was okay to talk about it. A lot of the people I talked to had very traumatic experiences of racism as children in school, lunchrooms or on the playground or just like general existing as Asian. But conversations about racism typically do not include Asian stories. It's usually centered around Blackness. And, justifiably so, like we're doing a lot of fucked up shit. Right. So no complaint there. But I think that a lot of times for Asian people, it is not seen as acceptable or like it's almost like people tell us, what do you mean racism against Asians? You guys are doing well, model minority myth. And it often felt like people didn't have the permission to complain because they should be grateful they're here. Sure. So yeah, it's a very different type of racism, I would say, from what the Black community experiences. And I think a lot of times that has been used to pit the Asian community against the Black community, which is very problematic and is something that, I hope to help bring forward when I talk to people.
Yeah. Well, it's great. Your podcast is great. I encourage people to go check it out. And you are award nominated. You got your new season right now, too. You are focusing specifically on kind of the crossover within queer LGBTQ community and how that kind of is specifically being embraced and experienced by the Asian community. And it's fantastic. It's called Nuances, and you can find it right wherever you listen. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think since the listeners of this podcast like history, the limited series will definitely be more up your alley.
I dig it. And you chose as your HILF today, I'm delighted, Mozart's sister. And I want to know before we dig in why, of all of our vast, the deep, deep bucket that is history, why did you choose this one?
Several reasons. One, I think a lot of history is focused on very well-known people who have done very well-known things. And to me, that's a little boring. I love discovering characters that have done really cool things that nobody's talking about. I think that's way more exciting.
Yeah.
And also, I think she's badass. I love finding women in history who were doing really cool things and didn't get their flowers. We should give them their flowers now.
I agree. And I mentioned this in the beginning intro, but we haven't talked much about your life as a musician and a composer as well. Is that how you sort of stumbled upon her name?
I don't even remember how. It probably came up in conversation with my husband or another musician, because my husband's also a musician, so we talk about music all the time. Yeah, it probably came up in conversation with other musicians, and somebody probably mentioned that Mozart had a sister. Schumann also has a sister who was a composer. I think she's more well-known than Mozart's sister. So that's why I chose Mozart's sister.
I think it's so cool. Well, you're going to be great. The next time that somebody brings her up, you're going to blow their hair back with how much you can tell them about this. Let me start by telling you the sources that I went to, because there isn't a ton of information about Nannerl. I mean, to your point, there's volumes and volumes about Mozart, even though his life was fairly short. And Nannerl was sort of recently, comparatively, even discovered. And she's got a lot of fiction is based on her. So it's hard then to find the source material. This was my primary one. It's called Mozart's Women, and it focuses on all of the people around Mozart's life. And so the first part of this book is huge wealth of information about Nannerl specifically, and then it gets into his lady friends and his employers, which is also great. But this was probably the most comprehensive source that I found. There's also a couple podcasts. One I go back to a lot. Many of you probably already listened. It's called You're Dead to Me. They did an episode on Mozart that has a big feature on Nannerl. There's also another podcast called Storical that focuses on her. And then because there is so much good fiction, I found that there was a novel, a fictional novel called Mozart's Sister, that was written by an author named Rita Charbonnier, but she had done such extensive research in order to write the novel that I found her bibliography to be an incredibly valuable source. But I tried not to consume too much of the fiction because it confuses me, and it becomes too I love historical nonfiction, but if I'm actually responsible for telling you what's true and what's not, then I gotta draw the line, right? And so here's my plan, LAZOU, with all of this information. Is first thing is just the name Mozart's Sister. It's like the feminist's dilemma when you do stumble upon one of these lesser known female figures from history, because for the most part, their anchor, the reason their page is even dog-eared in the book, right, is because of a man. And so often when we get into these women, we have to start with, well, who was her dad? Who was her husband? Who was her son, right? In this case, who was her brother? That leaves her mention. And so it becomes this really God damn it, I hate starting all these wonderful women's stories with let's begin with how important the men are. However, that is just the reality. In order to even really get to why Nannerl is someone to be remembered, the fact is you got to start with her brother. And so to bring us into context, I'm going to start with just kind of a quick slap of stats and why Mozart does have his flowers and why Wolfgang deserves his flowers, and that his light was so bright that it illuminated the people around him. And so we'll throw that in there. Then because there's this crazy wild lives between the two of them, I'm going to give a quick flyby biography of where they were born, to their deaths with broad strokes. Okay. And then LAZOU, I'm going to give you the conductor's baton and I'm going to give you the choice of how we go into depth then. So we'll know who Mozart is and we'll generally know how they lived. And then you're going to decide which of 3 fuck it buckets we're going to jump into to really get into the nitty gritty. Okay.
Okay.
And you can choose whatever order you want. And the 3 buckets that you'll have to choose from are 1, generational trauma. Yay! And we'll get into the nuts and bolts of why Amadeus and Nannerl were broken people, why their parents were broken people, and how these characteristics and events got passed to them and from them. Another fuck it bucket, fiction versus reality. There are so many great, as I said, fictional stories about both Nannerl and Mozart that it's tough to navigate the two. And we have things where they're this can't possibly be true. Surely that was too fantastical to be real. And you guess what? It is real. And then there's some that is no, that never fucking happened. It's the most believed thing and it's bullshit, right? So we'll give you those tools. And then the third fuck it bucket, because this is Mozart's sister, it is her episode, we're going to get into the bucket called Nannerl's Nethers, which is sort of the fuck history of Nannerl Mozart and what goes down below, so to speak. So that is the plan for the HILFing. LAZOU, are you ready to fuck?
I'm ready.
We'll start with the Mozart's stats. You know this guy. He is so ubiquitous. Between commercials and the inspirations, he inspired Beethoven. So if you think you know Beethoven, I mean, it's just, you can't get away from this guy, right? And he wrote in his short lifetime 41 symphonies, 12 operas, including The Magic Flute, Marriage of Figaro, Don Giovanni, ones that even if you're not into opera, you've heard of these things, right? 27 piano concertos, 18 string quartets. And he was dead by the time he was 35. And he composed his first thing when he was 5.
Yeah, I actually played one of his pieces that he composed when he was 6 for one of my piano exams when I was a kid.
Oh, really? Was it hard?
No, it was easy, but, you know, I was older than him already when he wrote that by the time I played this thing for the exam. So like, damn it.
God, this kid, right? Frustrating, right? And one of the things that made him different, that set him apart sort of lyrically and compositionally from others, is that he has these long phrases. And you know so much more about music and composition. So if there are better words than the ones I'm using, more specific, please feel free to throw them out. But he tended to use long, complicated phrases that were really beautiful and surprising to people. He had a diverse style because he had traveled all over the place when he was a kid. So he was adapting along the way and picking up pieces from things that made his compositions unique and yet familiar to like just about everybody. He also, on top of that, in his operas had like this way of really like psychologically manipulating the music to fit emotion and dialogue in a way that others hadn't. He could be funny. There's a moment in one of his operas where two little birds are singing ba, 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 to each other. And like one of the things that blew people's hair back was that it sounded like birds chittering and chattering. And so he also had this sort of magical way to capture the fantasy of the things. And child prodigies happened. Beethoven also started playing as a kid, but Mozart was 5, girl. My daughter is 6, and I still have to be like, go brush your teeth. And then I have to go with her. And then I have to like put the toothpaste on. And I have to be like, no, put the tooth on your teeth. Like the idea that you could be composing is miraculous to me. And this is tough. It's a tough road to hoe. If you're born in 1770 in Europe and you want to be a musician and this is your goal or your passion, you're in a bit of a corner. You really have to have a very specific set of circumstances for that dream to come true, right? One is you need to be born with natural talent, which check. Okay, he's obviously very good from the get-go. 2, you need to have some kind of connection to either the church or the court, the king and queen, right? Because these are the only 2 entities that can truly provide you with a salary that could support you. And then, just like today, baby, you got to go viral. You got to find a way for whatever it is that you've created to transcend the church that you work in or transcend the royal court that you're commissioned by so that you become this international sensation.
So I'm actually curious how that happens, because at the time, you know, listening to music individually was not a thing, right? You could only hear music when you went to an event that was planned by somebody that you didn't choose what you heard.
Isn't that
so I'm
nuts?
curious. So I'm really curious how you go viral in that environment.
Because of course, not to insult anyone's intelligence, but of course this is long before recordings. And so exactly to LAZOU's point, if you want to hear music, you need to find a musician to play it for you. And if you want to hear a huge, beautiful piece of music, then they all need to be playing it together and they all need to be very skilled. And those sweeping ceilings on cathedrals are for the music. And it is in part because music is spiritual, because that feeling, we all know, whether you go to a concert, a rock concert, regardless of the genre, there's this elevation that happens within you when music is soaring, and it is transcendent, right? It's amazing. So yeah, exactly. You had to go and you had to have permission to compose, because of course it took a ton of resources. So you would have to get permission or a commission from the church or from the royal court in order to make the music. And then, yeah, you'd have to be invited to come hear it. But even within all of those filters, just like now, whether you're wearing a corset and a wig and your ankles are covered, a sweeping phrase of music hits you, you lose your breath, right? Everybody does. And the hands grab each other and are like, whoa, I am feeling, my heart is racing. And then they go and they say, this 6-year-old kid had everybody in the room going, wow, because of the, not just the talent that he had, but the actual music that came out of him was, completely nuts. And that is how you go viral, is people asking, who was that? What was it? Everyone walked out of that church feeling something. And this person, right, did it. And so Mozart's dad recognizes that he's got two of these. Nannerl and Wolfgang are really good. They have access to instruments because Leopold himself, the dad, is a musician. He also has that. I told you the check of our three things. He is a musician with a job. He works for the Archdiocese in Salzburg. It's not a great job. It's a pretty good musician's job, but it's not great. And so he has these two kids and he's like, this is how we go viral. This is the part. The viral part is these two kids. So he asked permission to take them on tour. So the wife, Maria Anna, Leopold, and Wolfgang and Nannerl hit the road and they go all over Europe. And we've got demonstrating how Nannerl's 10, Wolfgang is 6, and they're showing off basically. And they're not just playing music, they're also doing bits, like showing how their hands can cross on the keyboard. And so they would do this like complicated hand crossing to show how sort of really in sync they were. They would throw out these challenges, like games, like we'll provide the bass line and watch before your eyes as Wolfgang composes the melody, or the other way around where we give them a melody and then he throws in a bass line. He had perfect pitch, so he could like pick out the tune for any instrument that they had. I mean, it made people were really impressed, and they made tons of money, and they performed for Louis XVI and they performed for King George III. He'll be back. And they get the viral part for sure. Everyone's talking about these kids, especially the little guy Wolfgang. But what they don't get, LAZOU, is the commissions and the jobs. Like that's right. Being great and having everybody think you're great is great. But as we all know, likes and follows on their own don't make you any money. You still need Nike to see your likes and follows and give you a commission, right? It's still the same deal.
Exposure don't pay the bill.
Sister. So that's exactly right. Oh, exposure. You'll have so much exposure. Thank you so much. So then there's these middle years where they keep trying this. They're touring. Nannerl is as good, if not better than he is. But he's still the star because, of course, he's a dude and because he's the younger of the two. And it costs money to travel, so the family sometimes splits up. But generally speaking, these middle years are just tours where Wolfgang is trying his ass off to get these commissions, to get appointments, to get royal courts, whether they're in Austria or if they're in France or if they're in England. It's like, hire my fucking kid, yeah? But they just keep coming back to Salzburg. Then on one of these tours, mom dies. Wolfgang gets into this kind of love triangle with this family called the Webers. He falls in love with one of the daughters, and then she doesn't like him, so he falls in love with another daughter. It's a lot of fun. And Leopold, the dad, is a patriarch to the start. He's hard pass. He hates these guys. He doesn't give his blessing, right? They're estranged for a while. Wolfgang eventually marries this gal, Constance, fantastic name.
Yep.
And Wolfgang goes with Constance to Vienna, where he gets sick suddenly and dies while composing his Requiem, which is like, oh, you've seen Amadeus. It's really, frankly, they do a good job. And Nannerl gets married and has kids and never composes. I mean, she does, but it's lost. She teaches music, but she's not like a big deal in music. And all we know for sure is that she and Wolfgang weren't great. They were really tight as kids. And then there was like this mystery. They weren't like buddies near the end of their life. But then Wolfgang's widow and her new husband are like, we want to make a biography of Wolfgang. And they come to Nannerl and are like, you were obviously buddies as kids. We know you and Constance are not close.
Yep.
But can you help with this? And something happens, LAZOU. We don't know exactly. But she finds out something that softens her to the memory of her brother. And even though she hadn't talked to him in years, she never met his kid, he never met her kids, she suddenly is like, oh my God, my brother. And she gives Constance and Constance's new husband letters between the two of them from forever, a lot, although not all, of her personal journals, and really becomes the source for like everything we know about Mozart.
Oh, wow.
Like the biography was really filled out by Nannerl, and like all of a sudden and kind of late in life and with a hand to her heart with like, I'm sorry for like not being cool to him forever, which is fucking interesting, right?
Wait, how old is she at this point?
She dies in her late 60s, which is kind of old. And she does meet his kids after he has died. And there is like this sort of lovely family, reunion. So that is sort of that, like I said, we got us the why is Mozart a big deal? We kind of got the broad strokes of their lives beginning to end. We're going to jump into our fuck it buckets to get into the details in a minute, LAZOU. But before we do that, any questions? Did I go over anything too fast, or would you like any clarification on anything?
Well, I guess so many questions, but I think you're going to get into them. Like, we don't know. So you said there's something that happened that changed her mind. How do we know that?
Yeah.
So before that, she was like, no, I'm not going to talk to you, or?
Yeah. And this is what is so great about history in general, maybe especially this time, but I have a hunch we're still doing it. We have this capacity to rewrite things in our brain, of course, right? To truly believe without any conscious deceit that something went exactly a certain way, that you were completely justified in your behavior, right? And then erasing any evidence that could contradict that. And it was just a lot easier, in the 18th century to destroy a letter, to destroy a diary, and to have that just completely erased. So, and when it was, we really don't know. Like, for example, we have letters from Mozart to Nannerl saying, I cannot believe how beautiful your composition was. Thank you so much for sending this to me. I've been playing it all week and I'm in love with it. And we don't have that composition. It's gone. Mm-hmm. And we have letters that say, I don't understand why you're so mad at me, blah, 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 and no response to that letter. You know what I mean? So that's why, as historians, when I say we really don't know, we really don't know. Yeah. I'll give you some of my guesses of what I think it was. But all we know is that there was no contact and a real icy relationship. And then suddenly a gushing warmness that is sort of predicated with what a fool I've been. Mm. So you kind of, it's like a black hole. You see what's not there because of what's not there, So
are the letters why we think that she had compositions, but they were lost?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Mm-hmm. It is many of these letters from one where we only have one side. Yeah. So we don't know. We don't have the letter that obviously included the composition, but we have him talking about it. And so, you kind of circle that and go, well, where did that go? And in this podcast, I'm going to tell you, here's what we know and here's what we don't know, but I will get into what fiction has said, how fiction has chosen to fill in some of those gaps and the ones that I like the best.
Hey guys, Kat Perkins here, creator and composer of the HILF podcast theme music. I'm inviting you to my new stage show called Shee-Haw, a tribute to the popular 1970s TV show Hee-Haw, with a modern twist. Join us in Cornfield County at one of our upcoming shows on tour with an all-star band, cast, and special guest singers and stand-up comedians each night. Tickets available at katperkins.com. That's KATPERKINS.com. See you at the show!
Hey, before we jump back in with Nannerl and LAZOU, I gotta say thanks to you. Okay, because HILF is only possible because of you, dear listeners. And you subscribe and you review and you share your favorite episodes with your people. And I love it. On my side of the microphone, however, it is a team of one. Girl, I research, record, edit, and promote HILF solo. And like any other artist, I count on the coins of my benefactors to keep dancing. The latest to leave some cash on the HILF nightstand are Calvin C., Alexis P., and Jamie R. And if you would like to jump in bed with the pod, click on the description of this episode and you'll see links to Patreon and Buy Me a Coffee and Instagram where you can
Follow me, follow me, follow me, follow. Follow me, follow me, follow me, follow. Follow me, follow me, follow me, follow. Follow me, follow me, follow me, follow.
So these are your fuck it buckets to choose from, and you can tell me which one you want to go with first. Generational trauma. We can get into the details of these sluts. Oh my God. The fiction versus reality, what we think we know and how it squares with what we know. And Nannerl's nethers. What was she up to in all them years?
I guess of the three, is there one that goes over her musical life more? I'm guessing the first one, right?
Yeah, I think generational trauma.
All right, let's go with that.
Okay, good.
Wait, so are they like the Spears family?
There's some dance mom in here. 100%. But like, at least when they did it to Britney, we were already like, yuck, you're not supposed to do that. It is really hard when you're reading through these documents from the 18th century when it's like, yes, of course. They just make these atrocious comments like, well, she's too pretty to have a career. And then everyone goes, yes. And you're like, wait, I'm sorry. I mean, at least MTV was like, this is crazy. We still did it. We still allowed it to happen, but at least people were outraged, So we'll start with the jumping into the bucket of generational trauma. Okay. So I mentioned in our broad strokes that Nannerl and Wolfgang are taken on this tour by their father, Leopold, who was himself a musician. Poor Leopold Mozart. He had a very complicated relationship with his imam. Okay, we're going to get all these Mozarts on the psychological couch here. That really, I think, explains so much of what happens next. Because Leopold and his brothers, this is Leopold again, is Mozart's dad. They were in like bookbinding business. That was their career. And they were pretty well off in the sense that their parents could sort of help them establish this business. Leopold was the black sheep getting into music. And his mom hated it, okay? She thought it was impractical. She didn't care how talented it was. Frankly, she looked at the checklist I had. She's like, you don't got no connections to the court. You're not that talented. This is just not a track. But he pursued it anyway, which we can admire.
I love that Mozart's mother is the stereotypical reaction of an Asian mother when you tell her you're going to go into music.
no, it's not practical, right? Yes, exactly. She was just like, you can't ever. But then, even when he started doing well and he got the appointment from the archdiocese, she was like, it's still bullshit. It's still a bullshit track. She never supported him. She never encouraged him. And she kind of cut him off. Leopold then meets Wolfgang's mom, Maria Anna, and she's sort of into music too. And so they start this life together and things are, going fairly well. When he sees that his kids, Nannerl and Wolfgang, are naturally talented, it turns into Britney Spears' mom, for sure. This like crazy dance mom. It's that overcompensation, right? It isn't just giving you what I wish I'd had. It's somehow
living vicariously.
You nailed it. Yeah. Living vicariously. There's a little bit of like the desperation is clear that he's trying to fulfill his own goals. I mean, it's creepy, right? Compound that with the fact that Nannerl and Mozart are the only two children to have survived infancy out of 7.
Oh, wow.
So Leopold and Maria Anna had 7 children and only these 2 survived. So they're also, I think, giving to these kids, in addition to the vicarious living as a musician, is just that like they survived. We have them. And there are frequent spells of illness while they travel. Touring is very dangerous. They all get various intestinal typhoid and smallpox. I mean, every time they travel, somebody gets just like terribly, terribly sick. And pretty much every time they were like, that's it. Our kids are dead. Our lineage is over. So I think that, and they survive for the, but like just trying to peg that desperate dream onto both of these kids is sort of multi-layered, right?
Yeah.
Wolfgang, then, after he gets married, he has 6 kids and only 2 survive infancy. You probably haven't heard about Mozart's kids.
No, I haven't.
Right? And that's in part same reason, similar reason you didn't hear about Mozart's grandma, right? Because they were like kind of out of the picture. One of them becomes an accountant.
See, that's a good Asian profession.
Exactly. Somewhere the grandma of Mozart was like, finally. And then his other son does get into musical composition, but was very shy. Of course, completely debilitated by the idea that he would never be able to live up to his father's reputation.
That would be rough.
That would be rough, right? And then we also have Nannerl's kids. So she does she has a couple of kids, which we'll get to later. But her firstborn son, she names Leopold after her dad. Her dad, who both encourages her to be a musician and then takes it away from her when he tells her that she better just be a wife and a mother. When she does become a mother, she gives her son, basically, to her dad. Now, this is another one of those what we don't know. Historians, this is so funny. I love hearing historians wonder about stuff because of the way they phrase it. But like historians across the board are like, okay, so she has this baby boy. She leaves. She has the baby in Salzburg. Her dad takes care of him for a while. He's a little sick. Then the baby gets better. And so she goes home to her husband and never gets him again, never comes back. And he kind of raises Leopold like another child prodigy. And that's just how that goes. And they keep being like, did he tell her? Did he force her? We don't know. Did she not want to raise a child? We don't know. Was the child so sick he had to stay with grandpa? We don't know.
Interesting. So she had other kids after that?
Yeah, I can. Yeah, you want to jump in? That's our next bucket. You want to get into Nannerl's nethers?
Wait, no, hold on.
Okay.
We skipped over something. So I want to know a bit more about how the music thing got pulled away from her.
Yes. Okay. So when they are children on this tour, right? Nannerl is 10, Mozart's 6, and they're doing, and this first tour, like if you were going to get a t-shirt made of your Nannerl Mozart European tour, this first tour is the t-shirt you want. The 1762, when they meet all the crown heads and they are debuting onto the scene. These tours, you have to know, they took forever. I mean, it was weeks and weeks on the road, and then they're staying in these tight quarters, and then they're traveling in these tiny carriages. And it was during this time that it was like Nannerl and Wolfgang develop a secret language. They create like an imaginary world made of kings and queens that are sort of peppered and informed by the real kings and queens that they are meeting. And they make up names for each other. And so in these letters, he'll refer to her as Your Majesty and my queen. And she refers to him by his fantasy name and my king. And the way that they play for each other and the way that they compose, even in their letters, it would be, send me something, send me a little aria, send me a little concerto, something that I can play. And then it'd be like, oh, okay, sister. And he'd send something. And she'd be, oh, thanks. I played a song. Could you help me with this? He'd ask her, would you help me with this? I'm trying to figure this thing out. And she'd sort of, again, through written letters, fill in these blanks for him.
So based on the letters of Mozart asking her to help him, is there then a possibility that she contributed to some of the most famous works by Mozart?
Yes. So if we know that she definitely composed some things, we also know that we don't know any of them. Then the question is, what happened to them, right? Did she destroy them? Did Leopold destroy them, her dad? Were they absorbed into the work that is attributed to her brother, Wolfgang, whether in piece or in whole? Or were they frankly absorbed by other composers? I mean, it would be complete conjecture to say that she sold them or that anyone else kind of had them, but we don't really know. We don't. And of course, there's no recording, so we couldn't even hear her play and guess what parts were hers.
Yeah. Because, maybe she was a ghostwriter for her brother.
Right? I mean, I think that they were so close, and I think that they were so inspired by each other that it would be tough to scalpel out, especially from his early stuff, who was who. I mean, they say that the reason Mozart was so good so young was because he was mimicking her. Because she was on these, and she's 4.5 years older than him. So she's playing these things incredibly well, much beyond her own years. And he is simply picking up on what she's doing. Which, again, is not to diminish that he had perfect pitch and he was able to do all these things. But certainly he may have had a broader stance because of where she stood.
Yeah, because the availability of feedback constantly is invaluable if you're a musician or a composer or any type of creative. If you have somebody who's both inspiring you to do better, but also a little bit of competition, but also provides you with really great feedback, like really great ideas on how you can solve your problems, you're gonna advance faster. Yeah, exactly. And there's something about the letters and the way that they wrote to each other too, that a lot of people will say almost mirrors the musicality. So one of the cool things about the book that I read, this Mozart's Women, is the author Jane Glover is a composer and she's a musician herself. So and so she was able to really talk to the reader who's not a musician, who doesn't know all of these sort of, the language, frankly, the vocabulary. And she would take segments of his letters and the way that he phrases his sentences and compare it to the way he would phrase something musically. And it makes sense to even a lay person like me. He also spoke several languages. And so he would sometimes, being funny with her, he would start a letter with like a sentence in French and then switch to German and then switch to English, just to be funny. And you can feel that in his phrasings. He tends to do that with styles, kind of mixing them together in a way that flows. So yeah. Okay. You want to hear my conspiracy theory based on what you've told me?
Yeah, big time.
Okay. So one possibility is that she was composing, but at the time, a woman composer was not going to make it, right? So there may have been an arrangement where she composes and he integrates that into his work. And then maybe the reason why their relationship soured was because she got a little bitter about not getting recognition for her work. And then maybe at the end of her life, she realized that even though it sucked that she never got the recognition, she also thought, in a way, her brother was trying to help her art get out there in the best way that he could. That's my conspiracy theory.
Oh, I like it. I like it. It has legs. You know what? You should write, and you should really like. You should jump in. You should jump into the fiction because the fiction is, I think, fueled in huge part by those gaps, right? Like when we use empathy and we try to be like, how would I feel if I was as good as Wolfgang Amadaeus Mozart and had to live my life just watching him? Because these tours are nuts. These things are fucked. And something that you should remember, too, that I try to keep in mind for a lot of these historical figures, girl, is that they are poor and everything they do and pretty much everything their parents do is motivated by money, but not the kind we imagine now, which is greed and wealth and status. I want to be a superstar. I want to have 16 mansions. I want to win all the Grammys. We are talking still sustainable. I need a job. I need a home. I need to know I'm not going to die in a ditch. Like, we are still talking about an actual standard of living that it has nothing to do with wealth accumulation at this point.
Yeah.
Mozart and his whole family are poor forever. And they're not impoverished, but they have to move because they can't afford their house. They have to travel while sick so they don't lose their job. They have to sacrifice a ton of time together in order to satisfy a desperate employer. You know what I mean? And I think sometimes these names like Picasso and Mozart and Mary Shelley, the author of Frankenstein, all of these fucks were broke their whole lives and desperately trying to figure out how to pay rent. And just because we have them in these gorgeous gilded frames in museums, and just because they're played over current billionaires' dinner parties, does not mean that we have not been sort of subjugating our artists forever. I mean,
copyright didn't exist back then, so they didn't get royalties, you know?
No, exactly. I mean, you really are trying to get your patron, another like word and concept that has come back up, right?
Yeah.
Your patron to, support you. And there is actually this interesting moment where Mozart's mother has died, Wolfgang's mother has died, and he has to kind of leave the tour and come back to Salzburg and live with Nannerl and Leopold and just kind of work. You know what I mean? Leopold has asked his employer for too much stuff, and so he's kind of got to stick it out, and Wolfgang gets his job. And he's so much better than the job he gets. And he's such a little cunt. Like, if you've seen Amadeus, like that personality element of him just being kind of a rambunctious little fuck seems to really be true. Everybody describes him that way. Even the letters, you read his letters, you're like, this shit. And he gets literally kicked out of his job. Like they take him and they kick his ass physically out of the building. And he has to hit the road again to get work. Because he just can't. He's like, I just can't. I'm too good for these idiots and I can't do this.
I feel like we gotta get into the fiction and the facts now.
Okay, all right. Yeah, we got another bucket. Let's bug it. We talked about like little known women and poor Nannerl and sidelined and footnoted, which is true. But also true is that there has been a lot. She's the subject of songs, poems, movies. There is this very sexy French movie called Mozart's Sister. And if you want to get turned on with some 18th century candlelit boffin, good news. This movie is steamy, it is sexy, and it jumps into a bunch of presumptions that you made, LAZOU, which is that she composed all the time, that she begged her father to let her compose, and that he violently and like viciously denied her the opportunity to compose and went so far as to destroy her compositions, and that she also destroyed her compositions out of anger and pride. It is fiction, but it is plausible. And it is very interesting to watch that play out en français. There's one woman shows, nerds like me have composed, shows to perform in various festivals about Nannerl. There's the Amazon series, Mozart in the Jungle, which has some kind of cool, surreal moments, and Nannerl makes an appearance in there.
Oh, there was? I don't remember that.
There, she's listed in the credits, and I'm like, well, I don't remember which one she was, but
Yeah,
I'm glad she got an honorable mention, right? One of my favorites, man. It's a young adult historical fiction series by an author named Marie Lu called The Kingdom of Back. And it's great because I told you that in this childhood touring that Nannerl and Wolfgang made up this mystical kingdom. And they would just sort of live in this fantasy together. And they even had one of their servants would also play a member of the royal family. And they would also occasionally refer to their dog as like the royal hound or whatever. And the name of this kingdom was the Kingdom of Back. And so when they would reference each other, this is what they would reference. And you can follow, again, if you read the journals and the diaries, you can almost kind of follow what were the rules of this game and who was who. And it's very interesting. So this incredible author, Marie Lu, wrote this novel that is true to the history, historically appropriate, I call it, if not historically accurate, of Nannerl, Wolfgang's talented sister. But she allows the Kingdom of Black to be somewhat literal. And so along her life, Nannerl gets visits from this Kingdom of Back and how this magical world blends with the real world. And I'm just like so glad this novel exists. It's a lot of fun. And it's so true. Like this kid that it's based on this Kingdom of Back is just fantastic. So the two main fiction versus reality, I think, to start with, is the movie Amadeus.
Yes,
because it's
love it.
Love it, right? 1984. If you haven't seen it, do it. It won a ton of Oscars. Tom Hulce plays Mozart. F. Murray Abraham plays Salieri. And it won Best Picture, a bunch of stuff. And one of the primary things that they establish in that movie is this rivalry, right? That Salieri is so consumed with jealousy that he kind of pushes Mozart so hard, and that he rejoices in his sickness and rejoices in his descent and even kind of steals his music. And it's a great movie. And that is a fantastic dramatic element. But there is no historical reference and no historical evidence that there was a rivalry between these two guys at all.
Yeah. That part I knew, that the rivalry was fake, but it was such a good movie.
I know, it's such a good movie. And it's one of those where like Titanic, right? Like Rose and Jack are completely made up, but all the other stuff that their love story allows you to sort of feel and see is real. It's sort of similar with Amadeus. It's like the fight, the conflict between Amadeus and Salieri is completely fictional, but the way the court functioned, what a douchebag Wolfgang is, how irreverent and kind of foul-mouthed he is really appropriate. And there was something really lovely about that happening in the mid-'80s. Because it was also a time of sort of opulence and this sort of like, we are the new modern, like all of history and all of modernity has sort of been leading to us and how stupid you look 100 years later when the real modernity is looking back on you and being like, oh my God, big hair, the whole thing. Okay, are you ready to get into Nannerl's panties?
Let's do it.
So this is where we have, again, why the fiction is so great, because it fills in the gaps that we don't know. But you can feel as a human, but maybe especially as a woman, and then maybe especially as a woman with like a creative and artistic heart, that her dad, Leopold, basically does to her what his mother did to him. which is just take music away and say that's just not for you. Like, you have to cut that path. And that she, though, unlike her father, accepts it.
How do we know that it was him? Like, is there evidence of that?
Yeah, he is adamant in his letters. Leopold is not an ambiguous guy. He, like, for example, one of the first letters he gets that is like, because Wolfgang is on a tour with his mom. There's sort of a weird shakeup where Leopold and Nannerl stay home, and Wolfgang and Maria Anna hit the road for this particular tour. Leopold thought it would be more cost effective on that leg for some reason. And he writes in these letters just like every minutia, what they should do, how they should behave, who they should talk to. And when he reports to them on Nannerl, he'll say, you know, she's doing fairly well and she's teaching lessons, and just sort of blow it up. Like, there's nothing of interest here. Nothing is happening here that is of any value. He also tells, at one point, Mozart's like, well, so I was going to take Eloisa with me to Paris because she's a great soprano and she's such a great singer. And he fires back this letter that is like, you are killing me. That is a terrible choice. Fuck her, and fuck you for giving her any of our time. She's beneath us. I mean, how Leopold felt about things was very adamant and spelled out. You know what I mean? How she felt about it, though, is less known. Again, she provides her letters and journals later in life, but not all of them. And the ones that are lost are vast.
Or the juicy ones.
Probably the best ones is what we guess. But we also know, like, we know that she wanted to go on these tours. We know that it's way more fun to be traveling through the royal courts of France than to be sitting with your mom in Salzburg working. Like, that doesn't take a crystal ball to figure that out. And that the letters would sort of, you know, indicate nothing's happening here. I'm sure you guys are having a great time.
Yeah.
She does that, though, but it gets worse, right? Because as Mozart's star starts to rise, and eventually it's like, okay, we got to marry Nannerl off, right? This is her deal. One kind of sexy captain, like I said, this guy Leopold comes around a few times, and Mozart, one of the reasons we know is because Mozart's like, hey girl, is he back? You know, they gossip to each other and stuff, and she'll be like, yeah, he's back, but I don't think it's really going anywhere. He didn't really stop in. He didn't call on me the last time. So you can kind of see, and that's the only one that's ever mentioned. Then the next thing we know, boom, she is married off to this guy. Wait, I gotta get his name, this poor bastard. Okay, are you ready for this? When Nannerl is almost 30, she marries Johann Baptist Franz von Berchtold zu Sonnenberg.
And I thought I had a long name.
He's 20 years older than her. He is a widower twice. He's got 5 shitty kids. And he takes her out into the middle of fucking nowhere to raise these shitty kids. They even describe it. They're like, so Nannerl gets out there and she looks around and is like, oh, it's lovely. And then it gets cold and she's basically in hell. Oh, no. And these kids are not nice. These boys treat her like shit. Her husband's not great because she's his third wife, and essentially he's hired a nanny. Then she has 3 more kids with him. Only one survives infancy. The one that she leaves with dad. And I would say the only good news is that her older than shit husband dies fairly, within the realm of when people die. But Nannerl, yeah, she is just killing years out here in the middle of nowhere while her brother is fingering broads in Vienna and is writing operas in Paris. And he's this huge famous thing. To the extent that news even gets to her, I have no doubt it fucking hurts, right?
Yeah.
And she is not creating. There is a chance encounter in Salzburg after Nannerl is now a widow and she's kind of an older lady and her brother's been dead for years. A chance encounter, LAZOU, with Constance on the street, like Caesar. It's like, whoa. And she's like, hey, man, my new husband and I are trying to make a biography, and we would really love your help. And her first reaction is like, no, like, eat a dick. I never liked you. And why would I need to help celebrate my brother, you know? And then the mystery. Now, you want to hear my conspiracy theory?
Yes, tell me.
I think Constance gave her something from him. Like, I don't know if it would be as direct as like, dear Nannerl, you're my favorite. I'm so sorry, I fucked everything up. Or maybe just a personal account of his or something. I think that she was able to give Nannerl something that sort of gave her that, like, no, you were special to me. Your inspiration, your contribution to me mattered. Because not only does that open the floodgates, and Nannerl's like, okay, girl, here are our king. Now you guys, this is why we know about the kingdom of Back. This is why we know that he wrote her foul poems and that he used dirty language in his letters. This is how we know a lot of what she felt about, you know, those previously missing gaps.
Okay, so can I build on your conspiracy theory?
Please.
Okay, so she gets married off to this guy. She moves to the middle of nowhere, and she's isolated with these 5 kids that she probably doesn't like very much.
No, and they don't like her either.
And then she has 3 kids. 2 of them die. We don't know what happened with the 3rd one and the dad taking over and all of that. So she's super isolated. And meanwhile, he's busy on tour and competing or not with Salieri, who knows, you know?
Right.
And it's possible that she felt abandoned by him and that she felt like he should know that I'm going through a rough time and reach out to me. And that it's possible that he didn't know a lot of what was happening with her. And like, there might have been this, and he might have thought, she's jealous and she doesn't want to associate with me anymore. Like, it might have been this big misunderstanding. And then when she meets Constance, then Constance could tell her that, oh, he thought you didn't want him to be in your life and you didn't want him to be around or whatever. And maybe that's how it resolves.
I think that's probably close to the truth, man. I also think that there could have been, like, as long as Leopold already kind of sucks. the dad, you know, we already painted him as sort of like a nasty, like, dance mom, show mom kind of deal. It's possible that he orchestrated some of that, like, in order to keep Wolfgang out there performing, for him to just be like, she doesn't even want to be on the road. Her desires are different. You know, he could have been telling Wolfgang that and could have been telling her simultaneously, you slow him down. He feels diminished by you. You would get in the way if you were to try to do this. And so there was just this sort of bullshit filter that was Leopold that was poisoning the communication in both directions. You know?
So did she ever reconnect with her kid?
You know, I tried to find more information about that, because after Leopold the senior, the father, dies, her son does come back and live with her for a while, and then he goes off. I mean, that's sort of the footnote. You know, that's it. And there's not a lot about it. I didn't find any information that said that he went on to do anything particularly notable in music. And if he did something else, then, you know, it doesn't really register. But I do find this fascinating. And I think it's also interesting, as the turn of history goes, that when we first encountered Nannerl Mozart in real life, she's this young musician and she's a prodigy, that people are really excited about that, because we can't believe there's a kid that's so good. And then that she's a female kid that's so good. That's incredible. Then there was like, okay, now she can teach other people to be a musician. And now she can raise children. And now she can inform us about the life of this other great musician. Okay. It seems like it took until the millennia, until 2000, for us as the consumers of history to actually ponder, I wonder if she was satisfied. It seems to me that you would be heartbroken in this moment, that we can even conceptualize the dreams of a person that is female in the 18th century.
Yeah.
That we can, that we can sort of be like, of course she was out there in the middle of nowhere fucking miserable.
Yeah.
Like, who would be joyful, raising 5 horrible children by an ungrateful man in complete obscurity when you are as talented as Mozart and have been denied and love music as much as he did, and it's just been pulled from you, that we can go, oh yeah, that would suck.
I agree. Anybody asking the question, was she satisfied? Fuck no.
Fuck no. Yeah, we tend to have this picture of like women in corsets in these stoic portraits just being like, this is fine. This is fine. I enjoy that. I'm just glad I'm fulfilling my purpose, and that they're not just smashing dishes.
Yeah. They're saying this is fine because they can't breathe and like actually, it's like those things look pretty but very uncomfortable. Indeed.
And let's also, not that we need to both sides everything, but I don't think Wolfgang was having a great time either, because there's that other narrative, which is the artist that is just being bludgeoned with demands to produce and to make the next thing you produce better, and to tour and to make more money and to wow them. And okay, great, now the next one's got to wow them. There's been a lot of speculation as to the extent to which that the standard and the expectations that he set at the age of 5 could never have been matched and could never have been surpassed. And it was that sort of constant struggle to live up to an impossible expectation that destroyed him too.
I think we have a pretty good conspiracy theory going.
I like it. I think we certainly could do like a comic book rendition of this. And I will say this, if you're going to go out, and I will join you, I'm going to watch Amadeus tonight. I had to wait. I listened to the music, but I had to wait to like rewatch it until this was over. But I do feel like if we're looking for lessons in the history, there's a lot to be learned, I think, from the story of Nannerl Mozart. But one of them is that, even if your life really sucks, that you can strive to be interesting enough to make good fiction. If everything's going to suck, at least leave holes big enough for me and LAZOU to spread convincing conspiracy theories about your life.
Yep. And I think we can do a pretty good job at it.
I agree. Well, listen, LAZOU, I have had a delight HILFing the Mozart family with you. I'm so grateful that you gave us the subject.
Thank you so much for doing all that research and indulging in my conspiracy theory.
Anytime. Listen, will you at least lie to me and tell me that the next time you go home to Mauritius, will you just like think about bringing me along? Because, oh my God, I would so love to see that underground waterfall.
Yes, absolutely.
Thanks. Thanks again to LAZOU for her amazing HILF suggestion and her dope-ass podcast and her music. Oh, listen, go check her out and just devour everything she does. She is LAZOU, and there are links to her in our show notes. Now, coming up next, man, I had an incredible conversation with an American legend, okay? The Benjamin Franklin. As in the Benjamin Franklin you would meet if you went to Colonial Williamsburg to visit, which is good enough for me, man. Brian Austin is an historian and actor who portrays Benjamin Franklin around the world and online. He's brilliant and fun and funny, and you are going to just fall head over heels in love as we discuss this founding bad boy. Until then, our theme song was composed and performed by Kat Perkins. A reminder that you can find my sources, links to the books, documentaries, and articles I reference in the summary of this episode, or by emailing us, hilfpodcast@gmail.com, or messaging us on social media @hilfpodcast. This has been HILF, History I'd Like to Fuck with Dawn Brody. I'm Dawn Brody, reminding you that history is a party and everybody's coming.